I want to thank you for joining today in the workshop. What we'll be covering is how to test your code. As you're going through the learning management system and you're working through your curriculum, you have some in-browser activities. You will face at times that it's not reading your code correctly, or it might not preview properly. You might have some issues with some of the in-browser activities. So what I'm going to do is show you how to work out of a text editor so that you can work on your code in the text editor, test your code through there, and then once it's been tested and it's all good, then being able to submit it in the actual portal in the curriculum. So let's go ahead and get started. I do want to mention that once I share my screen, I cannot see the chats. So if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Don't worry about interrupting me. Just ask your question. I'm more than happy to answer it. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and begin. So first things first is we need to download the text editor that we'll be working with. There are multiple text editors out there. As you move on through the program, it will be referring to Visual Studio Code. So I would recommend downloading Visual Studio Code. If you have some prior experience and you prefer a different text editor, that's completely fine. So here you're going to go to code.visualstudio.com. Once the page populates here, it should have a button for whatever operating system your computer is in. If it doesn't automatically generate the right one, you can go ahead and choose the other platform. So it is PC friendly and Mac friendly. So you just click this big download button and then begin to download. I have it already downloaded here, so I'm not going to follow this process, but this is definitely where you want to go to download Visual Studio Code. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and open my text editor. So I have that icon right here. So here we have the text editor, and there are a few icons to explore here. So here we have kind of like these files, and once you have a folder open, it will show the directory along with the files in there. Here we have a search feature, so you can search your files. Here is when it goes into source control. Don't worry about this for now. That's going to be something that's going to be presented to you later. This here is a debugger. Don't worry about that. We're not going to be working with that for a while. But here, this icon right here is an extension icon. I do want you to download one particular extension in particular. And that's going to be open in browser. And it's this first one that pops up by TechER. I already have it installed, so you're going to have an install button here. When you look for it, you're going to click that button. It will install it. And then this button will turn into a reload button or an enable button, one of the two. And then you're going to want to make sure that you click that so it reloads the text editor with this extension in here. Now, there are so many extensions for VS Code. They are worth exploring. They can make coding a bit easier and save you a lot of typing for particular extensions, but that's something I would recommend exploring on your own, seeing what works for you, what doesn't. But open in browser is going to allow us to open our code in the browser in a very easy fashion. So that one I definitely want you to download here, open in browser by TechER. Okay, so I already have this downloaded, but as you're going through it, make sure that you do that, and then also make sure that you reload the page. Don't forget to do that, otherwise it won't work. All right, so any questions so far before I get into actual coding and how to test it? Okay, I'm going to take silence as a no. All right, so let's go ahead and open something up. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a project folder. So I'm going to go back to my desktop and click New Folder, right click, and then go to New Folder. and let's call it September 26th workshop. Okay. So there's multiple ways that you can open your project in VS Code. You can go ahead and drag it and put it on the icon and open it that way. You can go to VS Code and open the folder right here, and this one. And then we have our folder open here. So right now there aren't any files, but let's pretend that we were working with HTML. What you're going to do is we're going to hit this new file icon here with the plus sign, and we are going to create our file, index.html. And let's say I have some HTML code. I'm just going to write this really quickly. It's not an HTML workshop. It's more of how to test it as you're working with it. So we have some HTML. Let's say I have a div here, and I have an h1 tags. And I have some content. Okay. And I'm working through my HTML, and I want to see how everything's looking. So the first thing I want to do after I type all of my code here is save it. So you can do Control S or Command S, depending if you're on Mac or PC, or you can just go to File, Save All. And you want to click Save All when you have multiple files involved, so all the files are saved at once. So there, go ahead and click that. And now, since the extension has been downloaded, the open in browser, I can right-click index.html and go all the way down here, and it says open in default browser. I'm going to click that, and then here I can view my HTML. So if you're having any issues previewing in the LMS, just go to a text editor and open it up in the browser, and you can see what it would look like in the browser. Also, that preview window is pretty small, so if you have a lot going on in your HTML, it can be kind of hard to see it. So any questions on, checking out HTML, checking it out on a browser and kind of testing it?
No questions so far.
Awesome. Thank you for responding to me, Jennifer.
No problem.
Awesome. All right. So also, thing about HTML, there's not really any error messages that will appear, but you'll have things look funny, and that's how you know you might have an error in HTML. So let's say I had an anchor tag, for example. Oops. And just going to put a dummy link here. Okay. And my goal is to just have this text here say, this is a link, be clickable, and take me to this destination. Now this is just a dummy destination here, so it's not going to go anywhere. But I just want this to be clickable. Now, right now, everything looks good. But had I had not closed my anchor tag properly, I had no closing anchor tag, and I refresh this, this is now clickable as well. That's not what I wanted. So HTML doesn't have any error messages or anything like that, but you can look at it and realize that is not what I wanted to do, what's going on here. Most of the time, I want to say like 95% of the time, you are missing a closing tag, or your opening and closing tag are in the incorrect spot. So that's something you want to make sure you're very aware of, is every opening tag should have a closing tag, except for a few exceptions, like an image tag and a link tag. But as you go through HTML, those will be pointed out to you. So yes, that's how you can kind of figure out what's going on with your HTML. Most of the time, it's just an opening closing issue. All right, so then let's go ahead and look at how we can test CSS once we get there. So let's say I add another file, style.css, and I link it. And don't worry about everything that I'm typing. It is something that you will learn as you go along. I just want you to pay attention to how I am testing for it.
Cassandra, is my
yes?
audio working?
Yep.
Hey, on that meta tag at the top, should we be using the closing bracket like XHTML, or does it really matter?
Can you tell me what line you're referring to?
Like 4, 5, and 6, they're all meta tags. So I was just
Uh-huh.
wondering if there should be the closing
Oh,
backslash.
yeah, meta tags do not require a closing tag. So those are one of those special tags that do not require closing. Link is another one. So they do not require a closing tag. However, if you do put a closing tag in there, it's not going to mess up your code.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't remembering the wrong stuff. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. All right. So here I've linked my CSS. Again, don't worry about it. You will learn how to do that. And now I'm going to add some styling here. Okay, so I have added some styling to this one particular H1 element here. And now I'm going to go back here and made sure that all of my files were saved. Go back here, I'm going to click refresh, and now we have the adjusted CSS here for this particular tag. So you can see that that has changed. Now, if I want to check out my CSS, again, CSS is kind of like HTML. There's not going to be any error messages or anything like that. It's just going to be a matter of how things look. So if it's not looking the way that you want it to, there is an art form to CSS, a lot of trial and error. One thing I like to do with CSS, and I recommend all my students to do it, is open up your inspection tools. So how you're going to do that is when you make sure you're in your browser, then you are going to right-click, hit Inspect down here, and then that's going to open up this panel right here. Okay, so here you can select the element that you're looking at. So this icon with the square and the cursor, you're going to click on that, and then you're going to choose the element that you want to look at. So I want to look at this H1 element, and here it will highlight, and you can see the little thing to say it's H1. So I'm going to click that. It shows me where this line of code is coming from in my HTML up here. But down here in the styles, it tells me what CSS is being applied to that particular element and where it's coming from. So if we see here, this H1 rule, CSS rule, is coming from our style.css file, line 1. Okay, so that's the code that I wrote. And here we can uncheck and check things to see how they look. So here, if I wanted to change this to red, oops, and see what that looks like, it will change in real time. And maybe I want this to be 3 EM instead, so it's bigger. And then maybe I want my margin to be bigger. And you can kind of play around with this and see what you like and see what you don't like. This is going to save you a lot of time, especially with CSS when you're brand new to it. When you are working in the text editor, you work on some CSS, you refresh your page. I don't like the way that looks. You go back to your text editor, try something else, refresh your page. Still not what I want. So instead of going back and forth doing that, you can just open up your inspection tools and see what it looks like in real time. This is not going to change your code. This is just like a preview. So once you've figured out what you want it to look like and the properties that are associated with that, you can just copy this and paste it into your code. Also, I want to point out here the CSS box model. So the CSS box model works for absolutely every single element that exists on your HTML page. So every one of these elements follows this box model. So this blue part, and if you notice as I put my cursor here on the left-hand side, it highlights it on the browser. This is the actual content. This is the actual element. So it tells me how big it is. It's 975 pixels by 55, and that's that blue highlighted part. So it goes across the page, and it's that certain height. Okay. Outside of that is your padding. We don't have any padding in here. I didn't add any padding properties. So we have that dash, meaning it's 0. Same with the border. And then here with the margin, it highlights my margin. And I had put 50 pixels there, so we can see the 50 pixels highlighted. So this is also really clear, really helps you define the size of things, especially let's say you bring in an image and it's huge, so it takes up the whole page. If you go to your CSS box model, it'll tell you the exact size of the actual image, and then you can adjust that in your CSS properties to make it fit how you want it to. So let's say you had an image that was 900 by 900 and it took up the whole page. And I want it to be a third of that, then I can just do 300 by 300 in my CSS properties and it will adjust the size accordingly. This is an extremely helpful tool, especially with alignment. Let's say you're working with margins and paddings and all that thing, and you're not realizing how everything is being affected. And when you go to your page, it doesn't look exactly quite right. So here is where you can kind of check and see what is doing what. Oh, okay, I see that my margin's pretty big here. I didn't want all that space, so maybe I'll reduce my margin to 30 pixels. Oh, keep clicking the wrong spot. To 30 pixels here. Okay, and you can see how it adjusts, and now the space between this link and this heading is a little bit smaller. So that is kind of how you would test around for CSS. Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, if you make the change in the browser, does it automatically save the HTML file?
No. So when you are changing it in the browser, this is just a preview. So if I go back here, it's still my old code. So that is just a preview. You're just testing it out. Once you've decided what you want it to be, then you have to go back to your code and change it.
I have just joined, and I wanted to ask, how did you get that on the previous screen where you have yes. How did you get the orange to show so you can see it?
Right here in this box model right here, as you highlight it, it highlights it what it is on the browser. So here, this is our element. So it's blue here and it's blue on the browser. And then it just is color coded as you go along. So the margin is highlighted in orange because it's orange in the box.
I see. So in the console here, I just click in the H1 box and then it will highlight it on the left side.
So what you want to do is you want to select this box right here with the cursor first, and then you can select whichever element you want to work with. So we can work with the entire div, we can work with just the anchor tag, we can work with the paragraph tag, and so on. And so then you can just click. It will highlight the code in HTML where it's coming from, and then it will show you the CSS rules that are attached to that particular element.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
No.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into how we're going to test JavaScript. This is where I find students have the most difficulty testing their code because we are dealing with the browser for HTML and CSS for about half of the course, and then we kind of jump into JavaScript. Now, JavaScript can work with the browser, but we have to connect it and do DOM manipulation, which is something that you will learn in this course. But the first part of JavaScript is we're just going to learn the basics of JavaScript. We're not going to even worry about the browser. The course does show you how to do an alert, so I can show you how to do that, but then it jumps into just the basics of JavaScript, and it can be a little bit confusing. So let me go ahead and try to clarify all of that before you hit it. So when you get to that point, you kind of remember what I talked about, and if you don't worry, you can always reach out to me. All right, so we are going to go ahead and add some JavaScript here. So I'm going to create a script.js, and I'm going to link it to my HTML tag, my HTML document. So I'll put a script tag, and then I give it an attribute and tell it where it's located. Don't worry, you will learn how to do this. So now it's connected, and the first thing that's taught to you is an alert. So alert is basically a function that is like a pop-up message on the browser, and whatever you put in between these parentheses is going to be what shows up. So if I save this and I refresh this page, we get an alert. It says hello. Okay, so that's what an alert is. Now, once you start getting into, I'm just going to comment this out. Once you start getting into the basics of JavaScript, you're not going to be working with the browser. So you can't just refresh your page to see what the JavaScript is doing. There's a little bit more involved. So let's say that I am creating some variables. Okay, I have 3 variables here. I and y are equal to some numbers, and then I have a variable add, which is equal to I plus y. So I should expect that add is equivalent to 18. Okay, but if I were to run this right now, I save it and I refresh, there's nothing to tell me if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. When you are here, you do want to go to the console for JavaScript messages. So open up your inspection tools, go to the console. Nothing is here. I don't know if my code is working or not. So here, this is where console log comes into play. Now, console log is mainly used just for debugging. This is for you to check in with yourself and your code to see if it's doing what you expect it to do. So console.log, whatever you put in the parentheses is going to be what appears in that console. So just like an alert, we put the hello here. If I were to write hello here, it would show hello right here in this console. Okay, but I don't want to write hello. I just want to check what the value of add is. So I'm going to put this variable add in here, and I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to refresh this now, and now we see the 18. Okay, so this is the console. It's used mainly for debugging. It's not any interaction with the browser. It doesn't do anything special. It's just a way for you to check your code. It's really good practice to put console logs as breakpoints in your code, because nothing's worse when after you've written so many lines of code and you run it and then it doesn't work, and now you're surfing through thousands of lines of code trying to figure out what went wrong. You want to put those breakpoints. So as you're running your code there and you have those breakpoints and you put those console logs, let's say the first 3 console logs are exactly what you expect it to be. Then the 4th console log is not what you expect it to be. So let's say each of those has 10 lines of code associated with it. So now instead of looking through 40 lines of code, you're looking at that one portion where that console log was not what you expect it to be, and that's only 10 lines of code. So you can kind of go in there and see what went wrong. So I encourage you to use console log to check your code, and it's a good way to test your code as you're working through the curriculum. Now, in the curriculum, if you do console log, you will get an error message because there is technically not a console built in. So this is why, especially when you get to JavaScript, I want you to work in a text editor to test out your code. And then once it's been tested and it's working, submit that into the portal in the curriculum. So that is how you can test it in the console. You can also write code in the console in your browser. So if I wrote the same thing here, like let's say I created some new variables. I can type in the variable sub, and it will tell me the value of that. So you can also write code in here. I don't recommend it because it can be hard to follow, but let's say you wanted to test a particular line of code, especially when you get into DOM manipulation. And DOM manipulation is basically where you're manipulating information that is on the document object model, and that's basically what you see in the browser. So this is a really good tool to see if you're picking up the correct information from the browser. But also you can just write code in here to see if what you write is what you expect it to do. So that's one way to use the console. Another thing I want to show you is, and it does involve you downloading something prior. If you download Node, and that is, oops, wrong spot. So Node.js, you're not going to be using it until the next course, but if you kind of want to get a jump start, you can download Node. And then what you're able to do is go up here and click View and then Terminal. And then you type in Node and then the name of your file, script.js. And then it treats your terminal like a console. So that way you don't have to go between browser and text editor back and forth. Either way works, whatever you're most comfortable with, I'm okay with. But I do want to show you all the options available to you to kind of test your code. So yeah, are there any questions on testing JavaScript or the console or anything that I've showed you? I know JavaScript can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, can you show an error of what would happen if you had misspelled the variable name?
Yeah, sure. Let's say I wrote addition here. So here, if I run it through the terminal, I get an error. It says reference error, addition is not defined. If I run it through here, uncaught reference, addition is not defined. So it's really good to see the errors through the browser, because what you can do is you can click right here and it shows you the exact line where the error is coming from. So here it says addition is not defined. So if I look at my code, it's right. I didn't define any variable addition. There is no function addition. Nowhere in my code is addition there. So I know that is undefined, and I had meant to put add because I called my variable add instead of addition. So that is an error that is actually pretty common. Uncaught reference, addition is, well, whatever it is, not defined. All that means is that variable is not defined. And if you think you defined it, it's probably misspelled. It is case sensitive. So if there's a capital letter in there and then you put it a lowercase letter, you're going to get that error as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. Another common error, actually, now that we're talking about errors here, is in the index. Let's say I didn't link my script, and I'm just going to add a button. Don't worry about this. You'll learn it, I promise. And so what I'm doing here, just so you have an idea, is I created a button that once it clicks, it's going to run this function called something. So in my JavaScript, let's say I have a function called something, and all it does is console log hi. Okay, and this is just to show you it wouldn't be something that you would necessarily do. All right, so here I have a button, and once I click it, I want the console log to display hi, right? So I'll refresh here. No errors so far. I click the button, I get an error. Something is not defined. Okay, what is it talking about? So I'll click here, and here it'll highlight the error. Button on click something. It's like, okay, well, if something is not defined, that means I didn't define it in my JavaScript. And if I go back to my JavaScript, I see it is defined. So I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Something I want to point out. Right here, it tells you all the files that are attached to what we're looking at. Nowhere here do I see my script.js. That means I didn't link my file. So that is kind of, and it's a matter of practice of reading error messages and going through that thinking process to really understand what it's telling you. But more than likely, you're going to get a not defined error. And that's, you just got to trace, okay, is my file linked properly? First thing you check. Second thing, okay, where did I define this? If you didn't define it, define it. Or if you did define it, and check the spelling of it. Make sure it's the same. Make sure you have capital letters where you have capital letters and lowercase where you have lowercase. Now, don't stress yourself out too much if you can't figure it out immediately. It does take time and practice. I have done a million errors, and excuse me, that's why I'm pretty quick with debugging things and figuring things out, because I have messed up so many times. So don't be scared of errors. Don't be scared of messing up your code. Just work through it. And if you have issues on how to work through it, or you're not sure where to look, reach out. Reach out to your mentor, reach out to your classmates, reach out to your programming buddy, reach out to me, whomever, just reach out. I don't want you stuck on anything for longer than 30 minutes. So once you kind of hit that point, reach out to someone and we can figure it out. But that is basically what I have to show you on how to test HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for coding from scratch. Are there any questions at all? I know I went through kind of a lot of material there.
I'm going to have one real quick.
Okay.
The script order, if you're running more than one script in there, makes a difference, right?
There it does. It does make a difference on your script order. So let's say, for example, let's say you use a framework like Bootstrap. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, it's like a CSS framework that has all these CSS rules that you could just use instead of having to define it on your own. Some of the components in Bootstrap require JavaScript, and some of that requires jQuery. So this loads from top to bottom. So anything that's dependent on something else, what it's dependent on needs to be on top. So let's say I had some functionality here and it depended on some other script file. I want to make sure that other script file is above my script.js, because this one is dependent on this one. Also with the CSS, it's the same thing there. So if you have multiple style sheets, whatever's on bottom is going to overwrite what's on top if there's like a same class name, for example. Like if you have a class in one style sheet called blue and you have another style sheet and you have a class called blue, whatever is on the last of the list, let's say this one, it's going to take that definition of the class blue. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Anyone else have any questions, concerns, confusions? All right. Well, I am going to assume by silence that you guys feel super awesome about this. If you don't, and if you're shy, please ask. I guarantee you someone else in this room probably has the same question. If you're not comfortable, feel free to message me on Slack and we can discuss it. But I do encourage you to just go ahead and ask the question if you do have that question.
Oh, well, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up. It is recorded and it will be posted by the end of the day. I will send out an email to the Coding from Scratch students with a link to it. If you're not in Coding from Scratch and this was a refresher, in your announcements on your dashboard, if you go to Workshop Library, you can locate it there. So announcements, dashboard, then announcements, then Workshop Library, and by the end of the day, it will be posted there so you can rewatch it if you need to. All right, well, thanks again for coming. If you do have any questions, feedback, or if you want to see a particular topic in a workshop, message me. I am very open and I love feedback. So again, thanks again for coming, and have an awesome day.
Thank you.
Thank you.